All right, so retreating in place. I was thinking about this because I was talking to someone about this kind of trend that's going on right now where people are going to ashrams. You know what an ashram is? The reason I didn't say anything about ashram in the title is that when we were talking about this, and less than half of the people knew what an ashram was. So I said, that's not a good title for this then, because we don't know what it's talking about. But this idea of an ashram is like a monastic or spiritual community. It's Hindu in origin, but it can really apply kind of across the board, and it does right now. And people who have the ability and the means will maybe take a year off or 6 months off and go live on an ashram and have an intensive time of a spiritual retreat and spiritual formation and mentoring and counseling and all that sort of thing. So it's a time out to be able to come back to their lives and become more centered and to learn certain things. And that's wonderful. Has anyone here been to an ashram? I didn't think so. But has anyone been to a weekend retreat? Okay. Most of us have been to weekend retreats. And it's the same thing. That's going to be a 2.5 day intensive where you go up to the mountains usually or someplace offline, and you spend that time doing basically the same thing. You know, there'll be a combination of workshops and convocations like this, times of prayer and whatnot, and you're trying to get offline, get centered, get some spiritual information, and then take it back to your life. And sometimes you have really intense experiences. I don't know if any of you had, as you've gone to some of these retreats, but they can be really intense, and you can have a peak experience, and it feels life-changing. By Sunday noon, when you're getting ready to go back down the hill, you know, your life has changed, and this is it. And then by Wednesday, you're right back into the same old routines and feeling basically the same way. And so the question is that, you know, what has happened? What's gone on there? Why doesn't something that we do that is so intense at times continue to play out in our lives once we get back into the valley again and off the mountaintop? So this is what we want to talk about, because if we relegate our spiritual formation to certain times and places, then it's never going to be able to enter in and permeate where it really needs to, which is every moment of our lives. And so is there a way for us to be able to put together a spiritual formation, a spiritual practice, an intentional spirituality is what we're calling it here, that exists between the raindrops of everything that you do every day? And the answer is yes, absolutely you can. How do you do it? Well, that's the question. I suppose the first question that we can talk about here is, what is it that you expect to achieve out of your spiritual journey? Have you ever thought about that? I mean, you're all here. You're all coming here. You're coming to various functions during the week. You come to Sunday morning. You're doing whatever you do. What is it that you want to achieve? What is it that you think is the goal of your spiritual journey?
Deeper connection with God.
Deeper connection with God?
More peace.
More peace? Anything else?
I like what Scott said, but I'm going to say it differently, is to try to be more God-focused and less Jim-focused.
Okay. Be more God-focused and less self-focused.
More of him, less of me.
Gotcha. Okay. Anyone else?
I think as much as trying to connect more with God, trying to deepen and develop very authentic relationships with one another and with myself and with God, all the same, because I think that relationship with God permeates those three relationships.
Great. Deeper relationships, not with God, not just with God, but with each other. These are all great.
Until you asked that question, and since I got out here, my thinking has changed so much. I haven't thought about that, but originally, because the way I was brought up and whatnot, my goal was to make sure I was going to make it to heaven somehow.
Mm-hmm.
And until, I came out here and lots of things have changed. I just haven't given it a thought until you just asked that. Wow.
So has it changed in terms of what you wanted?
Yeah. Now I'm learning. I hope to learn. What?
Learn what?
The answer to that question.
Okay. All right. All right.
The new answer.
The new answer. For those of you who haven't responded, you may have answers and you're just not speaking them out. But the thing that is really important is you need to have an answer to that question. What is it that you hope to achieve? And I hope that it's really specific. Something that is really clear, really specific. Because I'll tell you what we're going to talk about here in these 4 weeks or whatever it is the type of programming that's going to come from the inside out that's going to require every ounce of effort that you have, really. If you really want to do this, then it's not passive. It's going to be active. It's going to be something that you're going to have to desire. One of the questions that I was even asking on Sunday is, where does that desire come from? To want to go beyond whatever it is you're doing, to go beyond what maybe everybody else is doing in your family, in your circle of friends. Where does that desire come from? And if you don't have a really clear goal of what you're after, then how is that desire even going to be sustained past the first few days or weeks of any type of practice that you put in place? So think about that. What I want to submit to you is that what did Jesus tell us was the most important outcome or goal that our spiritual journey along his way could give us?
To love the Father and others.
Okay? To love the Father and love each other. To me, I think that's more a process. What was the result? What's the effect of loving Father, loving each other as we love ourselves? And everything else that we're talking about here.
Becoming one.
Becoming one, absolutely. And what does that do for us? See, that's what I'm trying to cut right to the bone here. To cut to the chase, what Jesus said is that if you follow this way of living life, if you follow my commandments, then you're going to know the truth, and the truth is going to make you free. To me, and to the way I read Jesus, what he's telling us is what we can achieve for having gone through this journey is going to be freedom. Now, to a Jew, freedom and forgiveness are the same thing. So a lot of us in the church have been talking about forgiveness. We need to be forgiven, but to a Jew, forgiveness and freedom is the same thing. And then, of course, that begs the question, freedom from what? Well, freedom from fear. Because it's the fear that creates all of the things that are dysfunctional in our lives that you have all talked about wanting to eradicate. Whether you call it peace or you call it serenity, whether you call it more solid relationships, whether you call it a better relationship with God, more of God and less of me, all of those outcomes, all of those benefits that you would like to achieve through this spiritual journey really are the eradication of fear. And that means it's the freedom from the fear that is going to take us where we need to go. So, if we take this journey, what Jesus is promising us is that we're going to know something experientially about this truth, and that truth is going to make us free. Just put that on your logs, put those logs on your fire and just watch them burn for a while. But come to a very specific goal that you want to achieve through your spiritual journey, because you're going to need that. When it gets hard day by day for you to get up and continue to do the things that you have purpose to do in your spiritual program, you're going to need that goal to keep you moving forward. And so that's really important. I've talked before, and we've talked about this in here and on Sundays, about having a personal theology or personal spiritual practice. And we were just talking about that on Sunday in relation to what Bubba had to say in his tape recording there. Is it kosher for us to have a personal theology? Is it allowable for us to have a personal theology? Is that something we can do, or is that the church's realm? That's another thing. There's going to be so many things that we're going to have to consider as we start to put this in place. Because if you're like me, and you'll have to tell me about your experience, but raised as a Catholic and then coming up in the evangelical church, that was all the church's province. That was the church's place to create the theology and give it to me, to create the spiritual practice and give it to me. Whether it was the liturgy of the Roman Catholic Church or whether it was the practices and ethics and morals and whatnot of the evangelical church, that was given to me. It wasn't up to me to make that up. In fact, to presume that I could have my own personal theology or personal practice was something that was akin to blasphemy. And so, can we give ourselves permission? Does anyone have a real problem with the idea of coming to this ourselves and coming up with a practice that will work within the larger practices and theology and belief system of the church, but it's ours? Because what I want to, again, submit to you is that if you have not brought your theology down to a personal basis, and if you haven't brought your practice, your spiritual program, down to a personal basis, then it's not going to work for you. Until theology becomes personal, it's not ours. And it's not going to be able to sustain us through all the difficult times of life that are going to hit us. So this is something that we have to be thinking about. A lot of what we're going to be talking about in here is going to be undoing a lot of the things that we have been taught, that we have accepted, and that we bring to the table. And so this is part of it. Think about these things. Where is this desire going to come from for you to do this? You know, is that desire already there? You're here again, so that's a good thing. But what is motivating you? And that's not something we can necessarily answer today in this session. But think about it. What is that desire? What is it that's spurring you on to do something more, something different? Why are you here tonight, trying to find out how you can build a practice that is yours and continues on? Yeah.
Would our value system would have a lot to do with that, wouldn't it? Or developing, or maybe putting into a framework our value system?
Sure.
Learning more about that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Working in recovery, in addiction and substance abuse treatment for the last 15 years has taught me a lot of things. And one of the things is that when people would come in to a program and I'd be sitting in a session like this working with them, after a while it became pretty clear which ones were on track to actually make something of their time in rehab and which ones were not. And part of this had to do with which ones were actually building a structure within their structure, building a house within their house. So they come to rehab, somebody comes to rehab, or you come to a class like this, or you come to a church, or you go to work, or you go to school. A structure is provided for you. So these people come into recovery and a very strict structure is provided for them. They have a place to sleep, they have a place to eat, they have the classes that they need to go to, the sessions, individual group sessions. They're basically ferried around everywhere they go, and they are watched 24/7 for 30, 60, 90 days, or however long that they're in the program. And so the structure is there and it's very rigid. It's easy for them, I shouldn't say it's easy for them, it's possible for them to stay sober during that period, right? What happens when they're discharged from the program and suddenly all that structure is gone and they fly back home to their homes? Everything that they had provided for them is gone and there's nothing left standing. What we were constantly trying to do is to get them to build an internal structure within the structure that was theirs. So when the other structure falls away, it's pulled away at discharge, there's still something standing that is theirs. A structure that moves in the opposite direction, not one that is provided for them from the outside in, but one that they construct from the inside out. And they work in tandem with each other. And yes, it's still going to be a lot easier for them to maintain their own structure while the other structure is holding them. But when that is taken away, there is a possibility that something remains. It's the same thing here. It's the same thing with us. When we join a church, when we join a faith tradition of any sort, the structure is provided for us, whatever it happens to be. It's kind of loose here at the effect, but it's still a structure, right? You know, in other churches, it's going to be a lot stronger. If you go to your ashram, if you go to a retreat, the structure is going to be very rigid, very tangible, but it's not going to last forever. If you don't build a structure within the structure that's yours, then it's not going to give you the results that you're really looking for if you're here trying to find something that is deeper, something that's going to take you further than you want to go. When people call me and they're looking for counsel, they're looking for help, or they're looking for some sort of direction, and their lives may be unmanageable at some level or another, there's usually something burning that they're trying to deal with. one of the first things I'll ask them as I'm getting to know them is, what does your program look like, quote unquote? And of course, then I explain what I mean by that. What does your day-to-day routine look like? What is it that you're actually doing from day to day? And they'll describe for me whatever it happens to be. As they're doing that, I'm listening and realizing that one of the 5 basic things that every person needs is missing out of their program. And those 5 things we've talked about in here before, but let's go over them again because they're fundamental. Community, accountability, structure, discipline, and service. And it's right there at the bottom of number 2 on your handouts there. All right? These are the bedrock pieces that we need. If we're going to build a structure for ourselves inside of the larger structure, this is what we need. Now, church and religion, if it's done well, is going to provide all 5 of these. The 12-step program, if you happen to be in a 12-step program, should provide all 5 of these. You don't need to necessarily get all 5 from any one community that you're in. It can be spread out over several things. Maybe you get some of them from school, some of them from work, some of them from family, church, 12-step programs, whatever. But you need all 5 as you move through. If they're not there, then that's what we need to take a look at. All right, so community, obviously. No man is an island, John Donne said. We're all connected. No woman is an island either. I just found out that until about 1500s, that man was used in English like the way we would use person. It was not gender specific. Actually, the word for man in Old English was were, and it only survives now in something like werewolf, which is really a man-wolf. And the word for woman was wif, which became wife. So wif man was a woman, and a were man was a man, a male. And only lately has that shifted so that man became associated with male only. You get that for free? Wow. So just so you know.
What is it you were doing that you discovered this?
You know what? The internet is a scary thing. You just... Hey, this was right out of Webster's, man. That's the way my mind works. I'm just studying things, and all of a sudden I see this, and then I follow this link, and that goes here, and that goes here, and then I'm looking up the etymologies, because I'm always going for etymologies of words. I just got to know what the words mean, and I don't even know how I got on this, but that's pretty cool, because we got all these ideas about being inclusive. Well, our language is actually more inclusive back then than it is now. But at any rate, no one is an island. We can't do this alone. There is an ancient Christian saying from the earliest centuries of the church that said, one Christian is no Christian at all. The idea is that salvation doesn't occur for one person alone. It occurs in the context of the community. And of course the ancient cultures were all communal. But this idea that we can do this alone in some way, shape, or form is so antithetical to what our church has been about from the earliest centuries. We need to understand this. It's one of the tenets of recovery, one of the tenets of AA, that nobody does that alone. No one achieves recovery alone. They're going to achieve it within the group. Why do we think that we can do this spiritual work alone? The answer is that you can't. Well, isn't that what the hermits were all about, and the monastics were all about? Yeah, but they were still in community. It was just a different definition of community. Even if they were living in a cave by themselves, they still connected with others, and they still had the sense of community that was spiritual, if not physical, for a period of time. And so the monks understood they were going into solitude for a specific purpose in order to be able to come back and bless the community at some point or at large. Or the idea is that just by being alone and raising their own spiritual consciousness, they were in a spiritual sense raising the spiritual consciousness of the entire planet, the entire human race. And so they were still mindful of community even if they were practicing alone. And I know that might be splitting hairs a little bit, but think about that. For us, the main thing to understand is we have to do this within the context of community. Most of the people that call me for some sort of counseling or in some sort of crisis are very isolated. It's just endemic to the condition. Because of the depression, because of the difficulties, they've allowed themselves to get more and more pulled off and isolated. Reestablishing community is going to be paramount. It's one of the first things that I start talking to them about. So we're going to do this within the community. Preaching to the choir here, you're all here, you're in community, great. Now, it's going to be community on steroids, though. It's not just about showing up, checking a box because you went to church or you went to your study or you went to your meeting. We always talk about within recovery again. It's not about just going to the meeting and parking yourself there. It's about going early, having conversations, getting phone numbers. It's about staying late, having conversations, getting to know people, getting phone numbers, and then actually using those phone numbers and connecting and creating a network, creating a group of accountability partners. And that's what it is. Are you in community to the extent that you are letting yourself actually be seen as you are? Or are you still hiding behind a wall of projection? Are you allowing yourself to enter into the kind of relationships with people so that they see you, they know enough about you, and have the mutual permission to actually speak into your life, to tell you when you're starting to veer off too far right or left or things are going on? Do you have that kind of relationship where someone is allowed to be able to counsel you, to advise you, to warn you, that can be there to talk you off the ledge when you're having a bad day? This is the kind of community we're talking about. It's not casual, it's more intense than that. There has to be a person in your life that you can be accountable to if you're going to be able to build this structure within the structure. I love what Frank said, years ago when we started working together in recovery. He said, if you're in early recovery and your higher power is only the unseen spiritual God of your understanding, that's not going to be enough. Did I accurately quote you there, buddy?
Right.
Okay. It's not going to be enough for you. Because how does that unseen God hold you accountable? See, we need living, breathing, flesh and blood human beings around us that we understand are God's hands and feet, that are God's representatives in our lives. But we need people around us to be able to do what we need to do in terms of these bumps and grinds that are going to take place along the spiritual journey. So it's community, but a community with accountability. There has to be a structure to your communal practice. What is it that you actually do? All right? In the Catholic Church, it was the liturgy, very structured liturgy that we went to, very structured times that we would go to church and the things that we would do. And when I became an altar boy, because I was always going for the next thing, then that added extra structure to it. We have our structure here, all right? But are you disciplined to the structure? As you start to build your house within the house, your structure within the structure, are you disciplined to that structure? Create the structure, and then you actually show up to it every single day. Are you doing something every day within that structure that's moving the ball forward? Again, the analogy to recovery just keeps coming back to me. In early recovery, it's 90 meetings in 90 days. Why? Because every day you need to be showing up and disciplining yourself to be moving the ball forward. We got to do that same thing. If you're building your own program, it should be 90 meetings in 90 days. Now, what's a meeting? Well, a meeting is whatever you decide is a meeting. A meeting is whatever you put in place for yourself. And we're going to talk about this. We're going to break this course into 3 sections. This first is the intro, and that's the page that you've got. Just trying to look at the concepts, look at the background. What is this that we're trying to do? And then what are some of the unhelpful concepts that we bring to the table that we need to rethink? The second section is going to be about the actual program itself. What does it look like? What are the techniques? What's the model? What are some of the things that we can actually physically do to put this program in place? And then the third section is what are the benefits? What is the effect? What can we expect from it? So that's kind of so that second section will start to fill out what does this actual project look like. But those 5 components, we've got community, accountability, Structure, discipline, and then finally service. There has to be a way that we give back. There has to be a way that we help other people, even if we're just a step ahead of them. You know, there's not the sense that we need to have this all figured out and be perfect in order to be able to help another person. We just need to be on solid enough ground to be able to reach out and pull them out of whatever they're in or help them to do that. But there has to be a way of giving back. And it's important to understand that this is not something that needs to be big or spectacular or even formal. It can just be smiling in the grocery aisle. You know, it can be something so simple, just the day-to-day encounters that you are experiencing as you go through your day. Are you present enough? Are you there enough? Are you able to help? Simply to leave someone better than you found them. All right? So these are the 5 components. This is what we're going to be building into our program when we get to that part. Question? Yes, go ahead.
The accountability, would working with a sponsor be enough as far as accountability goes?
That would be something that would be very personal to you.
Okay.
You know, if that's enough accountability.
Well, I mean, there would be situations where, you know, you'd have to jump up to the plate and be accountable if you are accountable. But I'm just thinking I could get really spread out doing that, you know, if I listen to a bunch of different people.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm more, because I'm introverted, I guess that might have to do with it. I think it's more effective for me to kind of have 1 or 2 people.
That's fine then. Yeah. In reality, there's only going to be a few people. It depends on your situation. You may need a group of people that you're accountable to and have permission to be able to contact. If you need to go down the list and call until you get the first actual warm body that answers the phone, it depends on your situation. You know. Yeah, we're not going to be accountable to everybody. You're going to have to use your discretion on that. But make sure that you're allowing yourself to be vulnerable enough and open enough and transparent enough to have those kind of relationships. You know, because if you're really holding back, if you're not allowing people to see you, then this whole thing just unravels. It's based on vulnerability. It's based on transparency and the willingness to be able to let yourself really be seen. Okay? Intentional spirituality. What is meant by that? Have you ever heard of the term a conscious artist? Ever heard that term before? What's that?
I like it.
You like it?
Yeah, I just like
A conscious artist.
Very aware.
Exactly, that's it. A conscious artist is someone who knows their craft well enough that each decision they make is based on a conscious choice. They're aware, if it's a painter, they're aware of the way color works. They're aware of how the mixing of colors and the mixing of their pigments will create certain effects. You know, they're making choices based on an intentional awareness that they bring to the subject matter. You know, we want to be intentional livers of life, basically, if you want to put it that way. We're not just being blown about by the winds, and we're not just, blithely kind of going through life and not being able to make choices that are intentional. If we do that, then our effects, the outcomes are always going to be random with respect to the choices that we make. We want our choices to all be focused on what we are trying to do, focused to the program, focused to what we're doing, so that as we make choices, they're actually moving us in the direction that, at least at the moment, we think we want to go. So an intentional spirituality is just that. It's not that we do a whole bunch of crazy things. It's that whatever we do, we do with that intentionality. Brother Lawrence was perfect here in the way that he approached things. Are y'all familiar with Brother Lawrence? He was a Carmelite monk in the 1600s in France, and he was a poor, uneducated man who joined the Carmelite monastery. And since he was uneducated, they stuck him in the kitchen. And he wasn't happy in the kitchen. He wanted to do monk things and not cook and clean dishes and pots. But he hung with it, and he understood after several years of doing this that God was just as present in the kitchen as he was in the chapel or anywhere else that he could be. And in fact, for him, eventually, he got to the point that God was more present in the kitchen, where he was doing something useful. He had a purpose. He was feeding his brothers, and he finally quit all other forms of devotion except those that were, he was obligated to because of the rule of the monastery. And he said, you know what? People think that you gotta come at this spirituality from all these different places and build all of these different types of forms and ways of going about it. And he says, it's not so. All you have to do is do what you normally do every day, but do it with this intentionality. Now, he didn't use that word. He said, do it for the love of God, but it's the same thing. He says, I can pick up a straw off the ground, and it's this sacred, loving act, because I do it with that intentionality. That's what we want to do. We want to make sure that everything that we do, and it doesn't have to be a bunch of artificial stuff. You're just going through your day with that kind of intentionality. When you're walking down the grocery aisle and you smile at the person who's coming the other way, and you get whatever reciprocal, encounter that happens between two people in the grocery aisle, with intentionality, that's day changing, right? That can change your whole day. No matter how you were feeling, the attitude that you had at a moment like that. I always love this story I've told several times about Marion having such a day, and this woman comes toward her through the apartment complex and smiles at her. Just one of these beaming smiles, and it changed her entire day. Right, hon? It's amazing how that can happen. The smallest things. Intentional spirituality is just that. It's not divorced from everything that you do during the day. You're still going to work. You're still making breakfast. You're washing the clothes. You're ferrying your kids around. You do whatever you do. And some of the things are things you don't really want to do, things you don't enjoy. But with intentionality, they can become different, transformed. You're all still going to like what you like and don't like what you don't like. But it's going to transform your day. That's what we're trying to build, is this intentional spirituality. Then the choices that we make to actually build this program within the program become even more intensified, because they're also part of this intentionality. Take a look at this quote that Merton has written. Yeah, go ahead.
Take a comment.
Absolutely.
I think what fired off for me was the amount of presence that takes. I can get so caught up with my stuff going on in my head that I don't notice people and things and all of that. And I think being able to stay in the moment, which is something that you talk about all the time, is so key to developing this personality.
Absolutely. Presence is going to be the key to all of this. You've probably heard me say before that I'm convinced at this point that 90% of the spiritual journey is simple presence. It's awareness. Because without it, nothing else takes place. Your presence is required in your intentional life. It's the price of admission. You've got to be present to be intentional. So much of what we're going to do, when we talk about the actual techniques, when we talk about the things that we're actually going to be doing in our program, they're all going to be program. They're going to be presence building. Whether it's centering prayer, whether it's mindfulness exercises, whether it's meditation, it's all going to be dealing with building your awareness and building your presence. All of that. And so as we get into that section, you're going to see how that is key and just a cornerstone to everything we're doing. All about presence. So it's not about a lot of effort expended out in a lot of different directions. It's about doing what you do and what you purpose to do with this intentionality. And I love the way that Merton puts it here. He says, do not then stir yourself up to useless interior activities. Y'all got that?
What page are you on now?
There's only 2 pages. It's the other one. You got it? Do not then stir yourself up to useless interior activities. Avoid everything that will bring unnecessary complications into your life. How about that? Avoid everything that will bring unnecessary complications into your life. Yeah.
He wants to do that.
Are y'all kind of running down the laundry list right now? Okay. What's unnecessary? What's not? What's that? What did he say? That's Frank. Typical Frank. But even the first sentence. Do not then stir yourself up to useless interior activities. See, that's huge. I mean, think about how much that we think that we're supposed to be doing inside. You know, whether it's prayer or whether it's this or that. You know, there are also useless interior activities. So much of what we're going to be talking about here is letting go of that stuff. We think we need to be doing, and complicating. We don't have to. We need to have some structure, obviously, and we need to be disciplined to that structure. But what Merton is talking about here is a core of interior silence, even in all the things that we do. There's a Chinese term for this that comes out of the Taoist tradition, which is wei wu wei. Have you ever heard of that before? Literally in Chinese, it means do, not do. Do, not do. Wei wu wei. And the idea is that it's an effortless effort. And I know that's isn't that totally Chinese? You know, totally Taoist. The idea is, yeah. See. Nice, buddy.
Thought was for my effort to be effortless, but I want my walk with Jesus to be natural, but it's not work. So
that's perfect. And I don't know if that got on there, but she said she was hoping that her effort would become effortless, that her walk with Jesus would become natural. That's perfect. That's perfect. If it's feeling like a grind all the time, if you're feeling under pressure by your spiritual program, whatever it is, you know, you got to let go. It's not supposed to feel that way. It's not that there's no effort. There has to be effort. But it should feel like it's flowing at the same time. It shouldn't be creating more stress in your life. It should be reducing the stress in your life, even though the stress is still present. But the stress should be coming from the outside in and not from the inside out. You know, we shouldn't be creating more stress for ourselves. So much of this is because we're still trying to prove ourselves, to God, to each other, to the church. We're still fearful that we're not good enough. And that's where so much of this useless interior effort comes from, where the unnecessary complications come from, because we're still on the hamster wheel. We're still trying to appease an angry God. We're still trying to do enough to be able to be good enough. If we can start pushing away from that, realizing that we're already loved in the experiences that we're going to have along this way, they're going to work hand in glove. And yes, it's a bit of a chicken and egg thing, you know, where how do you start to get the experience of the kind of love before you have it? And so there's going to be a balancing act that you're going to be doing, especially early on. But if you understand that this is the goal, it's going to make it possible. It's going to make it doable for you as you start to push forward. So continuing on with Merton.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
I'm kind of getting a feeling that, like, somehow I'm taking the word intentional and I'm thinking of it as positive, as optimistic, almost having like optimistic expectations. I'm not sure why I'm getting that out of it, but I was thinking about a time during Hurricane Sandy. I was off on storm work. I was up in North Jersey, and the town was devastated where we were at, Scotch Plains. It looked like a war zone, and I must have had 100 people come to me. I was a supervisor, and everyone has the same question: when am I going to get my power back? When am I going to get my power back? And after you hear that for like the 100th time, you're like, the next person that asks me, when am I going to get my power back? Like, you're going to be the last person to get your power back. Well, this lady was coming toward me, and I thought, oh, no, not again. When am I going to get my power back? And she came to me and she handed me a bag and she said, I have nothing. Everything is ruined, everything is gone. But I have a couple of bottles of Snapple iced tea, a couple of hand warmers, and a couple of granola bars. And I want you guys to have them.
Oh.
And it was like, there's some connection between that experience and what we're talking about here. I'm not sure what, but it's like it put that story right into my, right up to the forefront of my brain.
Isn't that the most perfect story? That's intentional. Okay? If you think about this woman's situation, she's just lost her entire home, her life, everything, photos. Think about everything that gets ruined in a flood. She has all that, and she's thinking of you.
Yeah.
She's thinking of these workers, and she's bringing the last scraps that she has and giving them to you. That's intentional spirituality. Now, did she think of it that way? Did she think of it as being spiritual? Did she think of it in a religious term? I have no idea, no way of knowing what her background. It doesn't really matter. She was present enough, to get back to what Judy was saying, she was present enough in that situation to be able to transcend her own pain, her own grief, her own situation to include you. That's it. Now, does intentional mean optimistic? Does intentional mean the hopeful thing? It'll include those things, certainly, but maybe not at the beginning. What intentional means is consciously aware. Consciously aware of your circumstances, the people that are in your sphere at the moment, and the choices that you make. That's intentional. That's what we mean. As you start to become more and more intentional, more and more aware, and make more and more of these choices that are including the community around you, the more that you will have an optimistic view and a hopeful view of life. And it'll be self-reinforcing as you go.
I think the God focus is what becomes the positive influence. When I'm totally me focused, that's depressing. That's not positive.
Mm-hmm.
It just isn't. That's when I don't have enough. I want more. I need this. I need that. I don't have this. I don't have that.
And this woman that he's talking about, she didn't need to go try to find some way to serve. She didn't need to go take a mission trip to Africa. She just sees guys up on the poles and trying to fix the transformers, and she brings them her last Snapple. Right? How beautiful is that? That's what we're talking about here. That's what Merton is talking about here. We don't have to go invent a bunch of stuff. It's going to come to us. We just have to be aware enough, intentional enough to be showing up when that heavy fruit starts to fall off the trees. That's the whole idea here. Live in as much peace and quiet and retirement as you can. Creating your own solitude and silence, carving that out in your days is going to be a huge part of your retreating in place. Do not go out of your way to get involved in labors and duties, no matter how much glory they may seem to give to God. That's a huge one. Gosh, when you listen to the radio and the television, every other line is about the glory that we're giving to God with our 24/7 satellite networks or whatever it happens to be. But listen to what he's saying here. Do the tasks appointed to you as perfectly as you can, with disinterested love and great peace, in order to show your desire of pleasing God. Now there's a couple of lines there, or at least that one. Disinterested love. What the heck do you think that means?
Self-interest.
Self-interest? He says, do the tasks appointed to you as perfectly as you can, with disinterested love and great peace.
Automatically?
I do the dishes with praise music on, so I can go to the music rather than I do
It's really cool. I like it.
Help her with the dishes already.
Disinterested love. Does it sound like a negative to you? No?
Initially.
Initially, it sounds like a negative. Disinterested love. When I've actually put this quote out in the last few days on the internet and social media, and someone came back and said, disinterested love, does that mean passionless love? Does that mean not caring? in the love? She was trying to process it and was having a hard time.
Not expecting anything back, I think.
What's that?
She said not expecting anything back.
Perfect. A disinterested love is a love that's not focused on agenda or outcome, right? It is only interested in letting the task, the relationship at hand, unfold, the process unfold, without looking beyond it to any other things that might be going on. That's what Merton is trying to drive at. Can we do this task at hand? Let's use the dishes as an example. Okay? So Cindy's doing the dishes and she's got her praise music on. But why is she doing the dishes? She's serving her family. She's allowing her family to have the kind of environment and the ability to be able to live in the house in peace. Is she looking for kudos back from Doug or from anyone else? A pat on the back? Maybe she is, in which case it's not completely disinterested love, is it? What Merton is driving at is just do the task. Do it with the sense that you are serving whoever you're serving with the task, but you're not looking at all these things. You're not even looking for giving glory to God, which is really giving glory to yourself, isn't it? If I'm giving glory to God, look, I'm the one who's doing. You're not even thinking about that stuff. You are detached from all of that ego head stuff, and you're just focused on the task at hand. If you're raking the leaves, you just rake the leaves. If you're washing the dishes, you just wash the dishes. And you enjoy it because you got the music going and everything else. And if Doug comes and pats you on the back, that's gravy. But you're not expecting it, and you're not even thinking of it at the time. Think about what your day would be like, even doing the things that you really don't enjoy doing very much, if you could do it with that kind of disinterested love, that kind of presence, that kind of intentionality. It's transforming. It transforms the day. Love and serve Him, God, peacefully, and in all your works, preserve recollection. Preserve recollection of what? And Brother Lawrence says it perfectly. What?
Him?
Yeah. In other words, God is still present to you. Spirit is still present to you as you're doing it. Preserve the recollection. That's what Brother Lawrence is always talking about. I pick up the straw off the ground, but if I'm doing it recalling God, and my relationship with God and how all of this works through God, then it's a sacred act. It changes. Do what you do quietly and without fuss. Seek solitude as much as you can. Dwell in the silence of your own soul and rest there in the simple and simplifying light which God is infusing into you. How much noise is there in your houses? Is the TV always on? Is the radio always on? Even the praise music, is it always on? Hey, nothing wrong with praise music. I make it and I love it. But there's a time to turn it off, too. When you get into the car, do you reflexively turn on the radio and have it blasting all the commercials at you? Talk radio. Is there always something? Or do you actually shut it off? Do you actually just take a time to just let it be quiet? Frank's got his place up in the hill all by himself. Is it quiet up there sometimes? Most of the time? I would imagine so. When I had an apartment all by myself, I kept it quiet in there. Of course, I was trying to be Thomas Merton, so there you go. A little bit of hero worship there, yeah? Completely disinterested love? I don't think so. We all got to start someplace, all right? Start wherever you can. But think about how often you just have noise going for no reason than just background noise. Turn it off. Let yourself become comfortable with just being in silence. That is hard for us to do. Marion and I just went to Big Bear, and it's quiet up there. It was like, whoa. We were just sitting out, outside the house, and that sound, sometimes we put on that whispering pines wind, that actually was there. The wind comes through those pines. There is nothing like the sound of wind going through pine needles. It's a different type of sound. It's lighter, it's airier than going through leaves that rustle. They don't run. It's a different kind of, and you could hear it.
I want to live there. It was so peaceful.
It was a whole different thing. But you know what? We can create oases within our own homes, inside our cars. We can do this between the raindrops of our life if we choose to. But you got to be aware. You got to be intentional about it. Because otherwise, we just go through the day doing what we do, and we don't think anything about it. And the world is not going to help you out. Orange County is not going to help you out here. It's noisy. All right. Seek solitude as much as you can. Dwell in the silence of your own soul and rest there in the simple and simplifying light which God is infusing into you. Do not make the mistake of aspiring to the spectacular experiences that you read about in the lives of the great mystics. This is huge. As we're reading, because part of what our regimen will probably include is some reading, so you're going to be reading about these mystics and the saints, and all of these huge experiences are going to be ascribed to them. You know, whether they're true or not, it doesn't matter. But then you're going to think that you're supposed to do that too. And suddenly here you are back on the treadmill trying to accomplish something. Your disinterested love is now out the window because you're trying to get someplace and do something that you think validates you as a spiritual seeker.
Ego.
Let it go. Yeah, it's all ego-based again. Let it go. Your experiences will be significant to you. They will be spectacular to you if you're really present to them and intentional about them. Maybe not to anybody else. It doesn't matter. It matters to you what these things meant to you. So many of you have told me about your spiritual experiences that have meant so much. You know, you can't prove them. You don't know. But they were transforming to you. That's what we're after. And in fact, when we really get to the purest form of trying to live a contemplative life, we're not even looking for those. We're just looking for the quietness of being, just being present. And everything that comes and moves through that space is okay with us. That's a whole different trip. Merton is just nailing this here. None of those graces, and he says in Latin, gratis date, can sanctify you nearly so well as this obscure and purifying light and love of God, which is given you to no other end than to make you perfect in his love. In other words, it's just that being, that experience, that is really what's going to happen here. This is huge. Read that over several times and see how it fits into the program that you're going to be putting together, because it'll reframe the whole thing in a way. Even though he's talking about this idea of not going, and Brother Lawrence is talking about this idea of not going out of your way to create certain things, let your intentionality rest in the day-to-day experiences you already have. We're still going to be building something. We're still going to be intentional about putting together a program, right? And that's okay. We're going to have to do both. Think of the program that you build as kind of like training wheels on the bike. We're going to build a structure within the greater structure of your life that's already established through family and church and school and work and the other things that you do. And so we're going to build the structure inside. We need to know what the rules are before we start to break them. Think about it that way. Brother Lawrence started out doing exactly everything that his order instructed him to do and the tasks that they gave him to do. And years as he moved down the road, then he decided what he could let go of. He let go of his spiritual director because he didn't need him anymore. He let go of the extra forms of devotion and prayer and other things because he didn't need them anymore. He was like one of those desert critters that got all the water it needs out of the food it eats. It didn't have to go find water anymore. He was able to do that. But he worked within the structure first and got to the place where it was down in muscle memory so much, then he was able to let go of certain things. So that's a direction we're going to take as well. So we're not just going to go in here free form and say, I don't need any of this stuff. I'm just going to, smile in the grocery aisle and that's going to be enough for me. No, we're going to do something more intentionally, but we're going to get to the point where we realize those strategies, that structure that we put in place is not an end in itself. It's a vehicle to get us someplace else that we want to go. William?
As you were reading this, it made me think of a conversation we had about a year ago where we were talking about gratitude and using gratitude as a way to pray, like a way to just be present throughout the course of the day. It's a way to worship. And there's some of that in here as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You'll find that everything becomes a prayer when it's done intentionally. Prayer isn't just what you say or what you think. Prayer isn't relegated to a certain time of the day. Prayer is going to be picking up that straw off the ground. It's going to be the data entry that you do. It's going to be the dish that you wash. Everything will become a prayer when it's done this way. So we have a choice here, and this will be the last point for tonight. We have a choice here. The spiritual way, the contemplative way, the way of Jesus, is really a way of subtraction and not addition. It's not a way of finding something and acquiring it and bringing it in to make us whole and complete. It's just the opposite of that. It is the growing realization that we are already whole. We already have everything that God can possibly give us in terms of our relationship with Him and with each other. What we need to do is strip away everything that obscures that truth from our face. That's what Jesus is talking about. If you follow this way of mine, you will know the truth. It will be opened up. The obscuring factors will be lifted and stripped away so that you can see what the truth is. That will make you free. Life will do that for us if we don't do it for ourselves. There was an article that I read a few Sundays ago, I guess it's going to be a few months ago, where the man who was writing the article said, I would like to say that I have become a contemplative by intention, but really I've become a contemplative by catastrophe. He was old enough that life had stripped away enough things that finally he was left having to deal with life as it really is, and not as he was projecting it or living the illusions. Now, we can talk about this in recovery terms. Do you have to hit bottom, or can you bring the bottom up to yourself? Living intentionally is bringing the bottom up so that you don't have to let life strip things away by catastrophe and then finally get to the same place. If you put forth the effort, if you can live intentionally, then it's a kinder, gentler way of getting to the same place. And that's what we want to do. We want to live intentionally so that we become intentional contemplatives and not contemplatives by catastrophe. One way or another, life is going to make you sit up and take notice, right? One way or another, your illusions are going to fall, even if it's only at the moment of death, where everything that it means to be a human being is stripped away. One way or another, that's going to happen. The sooner that we make it happen, the more years that we get to enjoy living this intentional kingdom that Jesus has for us. So that's what we're about. Any final questions? Concerns? Comments? Great. Well, then I either explained everything perfectly or confused you absolutely. Nice. So we'll continue on this. Bring the papers back with you. I'll have more copies in case you forget or whatever. But we'll continue on this this first section for
6 months.
no.
Let's get a poll going.
Yeah. I had earmarked 4 sessions for this, right?
Well, you definitely lose.
Well, you get the introduction done in 4 sessions.
4 sessions minimum.
Yeah.
Dave, are you taping it though, or is this something?
Yes. This was a new thing that we're trying here. So we'll. I don't know how well. I haven't got the audio really figured out yet here. So I've got a lav mic on, but I don't know how well it's probably not going to pick you all up well. So we have to work on the audio so that we get more of the discussion in, but we'll figure that out as we go. But at least we'll have this, and then we'll get it posted online somewhere. I'm not exactly sure where, but that way you can reference it and go back. And I've had several requests from people who are out of town, out of state that wanted to take part in this as well. So that way we can get that up there too. So we're trying to up our game here and get into the 21st century. So we'll see how well we do. Yeah, we'll see if this even worked. I tested it. It seemed like it was working. We'll find out. All right. Thanks, everybody. Hopefully you're staying for the next one. I see the food is all laid out. So we won't close in prayer. We'll just continue on to the next.